The Panigale V2, brilliant track bike, but is it any good on the road? Yes, yes it is.
After having so much fun on the track on this bike, I have been gagging to get it out on the road. It's always fun riding sports bikes on the road. They're never the most practical thing. There's always something you can get that's more comfortable, takes more luggage, has better wind protection. But there's something about riding sports bikes on the road that just feels special. This Panigale V2, when they launched it, they said they'd done quite a lot to try and make it work well as a road bike. From the higher handlebar position through to the slightly more supple suspension setup, tyre choices, and I think they've got it right, because riding 200 horsepower bikes on the road is awesome. There's no question about that. But you are kind of at the mercy of the engine and at the mercy of what you're allowed to do. They're so fast, it's really hard to stay within the law on them. The whole ride becomes about the engine. 120 horsepower, I've always said around that mark is a sweet spot for a road going sports bike. All the old Super Sport 600s with this sort of power, and having one like this with the V2 and the way they've built this one, where it's got torque, it's got pull from low down, that has really impressed me today. It's not super aggressive. It's one of those bikes that there's no one thing about it for me that stands out massively. I've not gone, whoa, the engine's incredible, or whoa, the chassis is great. But for me, it's a little bit of a GSXR 750. It's pretty damn good at everything. And I think it's possibly prettier than a GSXR 750, if I'm honest. That is where I think they've done a really good job with this bike. Older Ducati V-twin sports bikes had a real hit, a real kind of experience about the way the engine made its power, which you either loved or hated, and it really did feel like it was one or the other. This is a little bit more palatable. It's a little bit more easygoing for people who aren't obsessed with massive singles and V-twins, but it's got enough of that raw punch to keep hardcore V-twin guys super happy. The one thing that has really stood out about this bike for me today, in terms of the riding experience, has been how playful it is. From hopping bridges to little stoppies, little wheelies, little skids, it's a bike that just begs you to mess around and gives you confidence to do so, which doesn't always go hand in hand with sports bikes. Sports bikes can sometimes be a bit stiff, a bit twitchy, and a bit too focused to be a real fun thing to mess about on, which is fine if you're just going to ride them flat out. But if you actually want to do more than that, if you actually want some of your riding to be about enjoying a little back road, or you want to be comfortable bombing in and out of traffic in town, playful bikes are where it's at. And this is managing to do a good job of both. The motor makes really good power from 4,000 RPM onwards and gives you a decent shove out the corners. It's not wild to the point where it's wheelie and on command. You've got to rev it a little bit more for that, but for bombing down little twisty back roads like this, it has been really good. I've got to say, Ducati said they were trying to make this a good, fun road-going sports bike. I think they've really hit the nail on the head with it. Right down to the mirrors that, when I'm off the bike, I think look really long and a bit gawky, but they're really good mirrors, which is a very practical thing to say. I always feel like an old man when I talk about how good mirrors are, but it's got good mirrors. It's got heated grips, it's got cruise control. The braking on it has been really nice to have the option to turn the ABS off on the back tyre. Not for everyone, but for me that's quite an important thing. It's not the sharpest of initial bites on the brake. Again, I think a nod towards making this a friendlier bike to ride. So I've tended when I'm riding quicker to use 2 fingers rather than just one. I would prefer maybe a slightly sharper bite on the lever, but again, we're sort of splitting hairs there. For everyone who wants the lever sharper, there's plenty of people who are quite happy the way it is, but personally, a slightly sharper front brake. So I would probably change the brake pads for something more aggressive. I've not really had anything to fault the Ducati on today. It gets away with a lot of stuff because it's a sports bike. If this was a tourer test, I'd be moaning that the handlebars were too low and the seat was too thin, but you have to make concessions for it being a sports bike. But actually, nothing's to the extreme. You know, sure, the bars are lower than a super naked or a naked sports bike, but they're not low to the point of being a burden when you're riding slowly. The big flat seat actually is surprisingly comfortable when you're riding the bike on the lanes. If you're sat on it stationary for ages, then it's not so great. But again, it's not what this bike's for, and there is room to move around. I think they've managed to get a very, very sweet middle ground with this bike. And I didn't expect that when I got on it this morning. Neither did I expect it to be rapidly heading towards the title of Chris's favourite road bike, which I didn't really have this earmarked for that. Up until now, the KTM 890 Duke R has been my favourite road sports bike. The engine, the chassis, the brakes on that bike all kind of gave it that title, but this one is, I think, going to eke it out. The fact that it's a sports bike always wins slightly for me. The fact that I actually prefer the V-twin engine, the punch and feel of this V-twin does it for me more than a parallel twin. And I've been very, very surprised how well this has coped with Chris's typical rough, bumpy, horrible roads. Especially having ridden it on the track and been really impressed by it there as well. Ducati has built an absolute sweetie of a bike here.
B-Moto are just one of the companies that support us here at Bike World, and they're the people that help us make these videos week in, week out throughout the year. Now, their approach to insurance is kind of to tailor it to you as an individual, which means they can do you motorbike insurance, van insurance, travel cover, and they can tweak the policy to give it the bit that you need that matters most to you. You've got a load of optional extras on there as well, and best of all, when you pick up the phone, the people on the other end tend to know what bikes you're talking about. If you say a Fireblade, they know what a Fireblade is, they'll ask you which year. They do multi-bike discounts, and one of my favourite things is the lack of a mid-term adjustment fee. So if you want to make a change to your policy, change the bike, there's no extra charge. 98% of their customers actually recommend them. I definitely do. I've used them for a long time before the Bike World sponsorship, and I've always been happy. Check out B-Moto on the link below, and you can support the companies that support us here at Bike World. When Ducati launched the Panigale V2, they launched it on track and then told us it was a great road bike. Interesting choice, but we had a fantastic time whizzing around in circles, doing skids, wheelies, stoppies, and generally hooning around like idiots. So definitely not one to complain. And it did prove that despite the fact that they'd reduced the power, despite the fact there were a few changes that made it a better road bike, it's still a phenomenally capable track bike, and I definitely didn't feel any of those road changes spoiling my time on a circuit, which meant I had a little doubt in my mind as to whether it was actually going to translate back to the road that well. So today we took it out in typical British weather, and had some fantastic fun charging around my favourite roads, the gnarliest, bumpiest, horriblest B roads I could find, to see if this track-ish superbike could actually become a brilliant road bike too. That's a challenge, but I think they've managed it. Now, when I'm talking about changes to make things better for road use, the things I want to highlight on this bike particularly are little bits like the higher handlebars, the lower foot pegs, the more comfortable riding position, which actually has a place on track, but on road is definitely beneficial. And then on top of that, suspension setup, chassis setup. If you make a chassis really stiff, if you make suspension firm and close all the valving up, they feel amazing on track when you're riding fast, but then when you're riding slow on track or when you're riding at road speeds with cold tyres, they feel nervous, skittish, unfriendly. Now sometimes that's quite exciting. Sometimes that is what people look for in a sports bike, but a lot of the time it's the reason many people got off their sports bikes and got onto naked roadsters, adventure bikes and retro bikes because they wanted something that felt friendly, that made them feel happy at normal road pace. Now Ducati's done that with the V2. They've reduced that full race, kind of full focused derivative sports bike thing down to something that's still phenomenally capable on track, but it's designed to work on the road. It is a bit softer. It is a little bit more relaxed in the riding position, and it is a little bit less shaky and angry. But what it means is you can have a great time riding on the road. And in all honesty today, hand on heart, there were very few moments where I kind of wanted it to do anything different. Now, interestingly, with a superbike looking thing, a sports bike, let's call it, there's a little bit of you that kind of forgives a lot about it. If this was a naked road bike, I'd be saying, oh, it's not that comfortable, the handlebars are a bit low. Because it's a sports bike, I'm going, oh, for a sports bike, it's really comfy. So there's always these caveats. You've got to want a sports bike in the first place to buy a bike that looks like that. And if you do, you'll find that for a sports bike, it's a little bit more comfortable. It's a little bit softer. It's a little bit more compliant, which makes road riding more fun. Now, if you do 20 track days a year, if you ship your bike down to Spain for the beginning of winter and then ship it back again in spring, you don't need to have one of these. But if you actually ride your bike on the road, if track days are a nice little dessert on a proper meal of riding everywhere else, this thing starts to make good sense. Now with me love of sports bike head on, I think the handlebars look a bit gawky. I think the mirrors look like they stick out a mile. But with I've just been riding this all day and I've got a smile on my face head on, I can see loads in the mirrors and the handlebars are in a really nice place for road riding. And that's what you've got to decide. Sports bikes used to mean sacrificing a lot. It used to mean you kind of had that hardcore edge where you wanted your hands below your knees, you were prepared for all the discomfort for that hour or so of perfect roads where it all made sense. Not so much anymore. If you want to ride your sports bike on the road, I'm going to have to put the Ducati Panigale V2 right at the top of my list of recommendations. Now, one of the probably key points with this bike is going to be the price. It ain't cheap. There's definitely bikes in this category that cost a few £1,000s less, which kind of got me thinking, because my initial reaction was, I'd like it to be a bit cheaper, but then I thought, would I? Would I have liked them to dump the options for roll-in suspension, made the bodywork cheaper, reduce the number of fancy bits on it, put a cheaper brake caliper on it? Would I want that? Ducatis, for me, personally, have always been an aspirational bike. The one I had on the wall, the 998R, I'm 40 years old and I still can't afford one. You know, I've always wanted a Ducati and I feel like they kind of should be aspirational. So to make a cheap Ducati that's got budget components to compete head to head with bikes like Yamaha's R9 or even the new wave of cheaper stuff coming over from China, I think I'd be more annoyed about that than I am that this thing costs north of 15 grand. I think, actually, I prefer them being a bit pricey with the fancy components, and if you can't afford them, you don't have to. You can just look at them and wish you could own one. Maybe that's a little bit of a rose-tinted view, but yeah, before you slag it off for the price, think about how disappointed we'd be with a cut price, budget, cheap around the edges Ducati. I feel like that would be a bad thing.